everybody, to the First Name Basis podcast. This has been a remote series that we've been conducting here at TribalScale, where we start with industry guests, leaders in technology, and we have an authentic but very informal conversation on a variety of topics, including tech and what's happening in innovation. I'm Sheetal, Jaitly, the host for today's podcast, and with me I got two incredible guests who I've been chatting with about innovation a lot, who have done a lot in their careers, and I'll let them introduce themselves. Chitra, do you want to go first?
Sure. So thanks for inviting me to be a guest. It's very exciting. My name is Chitra Anand. I am an advisor to high growth tech companies. I'm the author of a book called The Greenhouse Approach, and I've just completed a PhD in corporate innovation. So very, very timely. I've spent my career
Anand, I should have said.
Yeah.
It was
it's
yesterday.
Very fresh. Right? It's literally yesterday. So yeah. I've spent my career in the tech space. So a few years at a software company in Waterloo called OpenText. I spent 10 years at TELUS. So really lived through the transformation that TELUS has gone through. And then I spent 5 years at Microsoft, also living through that transformation when they went through from software to what we know today is mobile and cloud. Most of my roles have been in strategy, sales, and branding and marketing.
Look at that Microsoft stock price right now.
I know.
Unreal.
Yeah.
It's standing the test. Standing the test. John, how you doing, man?
Good.
We were just talking about the lovely art your wife curated behind you. Yeah. I love the backdrop.
Right, that's right.
John, introduce yourself for those viewers who don't know you.
So I'm John Ruffolo. I've actually been in the technology game really since 1992. So the receding hairline is a testament to the 3 or 4 boom and bust cycles that I've been through, we're in this one again. Everyone is both different and everyone is the same in many respects, but passionate supporter, venture capitalist, co-founder of the Council of Canadian Innovators. And, I think, the best way to describe me, just a passionate supporter of entrepreneurship and innovation in Canada.
Awesome. Could you describe what the Council of Canadian Innovators is? What do they do?
Sure. It's a lobby group that Jim Balsley and I co-founded in 2016. And really what it was designed to do was to fill a void that we saw in Canada. And it was really designed to act as a lobby group for Canadian-based Indigenous companies that were scaling up from $10 million and above in a variety of technology, healthcare, clean tech, really kind of the innovation subsegments. And all it does, it really builds the relationships between the federal, provincial, and municipal governments right across the country. And a number of people may have seen the incredible work that the team there, led by Ben Bergen, has done all through this COVID. It's really been the one place that the tech community across Canada has been coalescing around. And it's really proving this kind of single voice. We're all in this together. Mm-hmm. Government needs lots and lots of help, but they get confused when we get so many independent voices talking to them. And this was really an opportunity to partner together.
So as a tech entrepreneur myself, I found it very interesting. COVID, it seems like it came overnight and took everybody by storm and completely unprepared. So it was we all look to the government to say, what could we do and what can be done? And it looks like the government almost took an agile approach and made an iterative way of actually doing some of these rollout plans that thankfully, especially for TribalScale, have actually even helped in saving jobs. Could you talk a little bit about that approach? I know you were pretty vocal on LinkedIn and some other platforms on what needs to be done, what can be done.
Yeah, and I'll also turn this over to Chitra. We together wrote kind of a bit of an action plan really designed for the various levels of government. But really, there's a three-phased approach whenever you get in these sort of situations. Phase one was, and exactly what you had said, this is where the unusual part was. We've never seen the demand side equation drop off this dramatically, certainly since last 30 years since I've been working. And it was very unusual. And this phase one was, in essence, freeze the economy. So we knew this was going to get bad very, very quickly. I think people were underestimating what would happen when demand would drop off. And what we convinced the government to do was, we saw, particularly at the earliest stages of businesses, the most vulnerable, and this is right across the technology to the restaurant owner, to the salon owner, etc. If the smallest companies who have the least amount of resources hit the wall fast and hit it hard, it creates a massive cascading impact of elimination of demand right up the chain. So what we really needed to do was protect those industries as fast as we can, number one, from a liquidity perspective. And number two, and most importantly, have them or encourage them to hold on to their workers. The concern that I have too is there was starting to become a tipping point where it was becoming easier for entrepreneurs to lay off workers. And the problem, and then the government would support them through the extended EI CERB benefit.
Right.
The problem with that strategy, though, is a good entrepreneur, a logically speaking entrepreneur, the moment someone's laid off, it is a little bit, out of sight, out of mind. And you only bring them back, when you really have certainty that demand is back to normal. And the problem is, many of those workers may never then come back to work for a very, very long period of time. So the idea was, if you hold on to these workers, you figure out how you can provide 25% of the funding. But what I started to see very quickly is those entrepreneurs that held on to the workers, they started pivoting their business models. I know you started doing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And thinking, okay, all right, my demand's eroded here, but you're still employed by me here. Help me out. Let's figure this out. And a number of those folks who have done that, they have pivoted, number one. Number two, the idea was, once we start getting back to normal, they're already working for you. Yeah. There is no like, should I bring them back? They're there. So boom, they start. So that was really the concept that we were really trying to communicate.
And Chitra, this kind of goes to what you wrote about in your book, in the greenhouse approach. I felt like TribalScale, and I'll share a personal story here. We had to transform ourselves. We have engineers who aren't coding right now. But instead of letting them go, because of this pivot, we were like, well, what can we make them do? And we, had to start inspiring. There was change agents who said, hey, you know what? We've always been effed up in this particular area. Let's go solve that area. And we started getting teams and little task force and little pods going where everybody in the organization feels so super energized right now and working towards a greater cause. Because when this COVID pandemic, we start coming out of it, we're so much better suited to do that. And it was really cool to see that those change agents are the ones who call them team captains, you'll say, and started saying, hey, I need more than just engineering on this particular problem. I need people from product or people from design or people from the business development team. And let's start solving this bigger problem. And we've seen a cascading effect over the past couple of weeks that if they're not working on client facing things, they're actually setting TribalScale up, for us to be much better suited for when we come out of this pandemic and what type of company we need to be to come out of this pandemic. And so talk a little bit, you talk a lot about inspiring, getting those change agents and then empowering them to make change. Talk a little bit about how that's, what your theory was there and what you've seen at Microsoft.
Yeah, I mean,
and other companies.
definitely. Like, I think pivot is the word of 2020 right now. One of the things that I talk about a lot is adaptation theory, right? So it's all about looking, and I talk about, Darwinianism and the whole theory of evolution and how does that relate to business. So, it's really about adapting your business, and we're seeing that right now quite vividly with what's happening with COVID. But you're seeing a lot of companies, creating new business models, shifting, trying new ways of doing things, because it's really, if you take a few steps back, it's really looking at a worldview, because culture and politics and social changes really dictate how business needs to be done.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result of that, you have to have this outside-in perspective where you're looking at the shifts that are happening from a world perspective, and then how do you take those changes and then turn them into something meaningful and that's relevant, that's really going to connect with your existing customer base and your new customer base. Because if you look at it, the average life cycle of any Fortune 500 company is about 20 years. If you look at some of the top tech companies, for example, like I spent 5 years at Microsoft, and I was there amidst this massive transformation that they had to go through. Microsoft is 45 years old.
Yeah.
And who would have thought years ago, and would make a bet. I mean, if you had to make a bet on a tech company right now, you would never say that it would be around for so long. So when you start to really analyze and look at some of the shifts and changes that they made, they took this whole idea of these micro experiments that they would do inside, and it's all about planning for these changes. You don't ever see any of these companies hit one massive jackpot on a transformation or a new product or a new model or a new service. It's like all of these, it's a process of iteration, and it's a constant hypothesis testing along the way. So their shift was from software, they went to devices and services, and then they quickly went to mobile and cloud. And it was through this process of constant iteration, this constant sort of hunger to learn more, to see what's happening from a world perspective, and then how do you bring that inside your organization through a series of experiments so that you can transform.
So is the main takeaway here that entrepreneurs should be looking at like those mini experiments? I know we're doing a bunch of mini experiments right now, but is that the right train of thought? Some of them are going to work, some of them are going to fail, but it's better.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think so. It's like microdosing experiments, if you will, right along the way. If you talk to any entrepreneur, so I do a lot of comparisons where I talk to entrepreneurs and then people in corporate innovation and sort of look at contrasts and comparisons on how they think. Any great, you're an entrepreneur, any great innovation or any great product that you have is a series of tests, and you extract those learnings and then you continue on to the next level. It's like this process of this learning loop that's constantly happening. So it's this mindset and this shift of how do we think and how do we discover and how do we learn, and then how do we uncover these opportunities and align it to what's happening from a world perspective.
So John, going back to some of the work that your innovation council did to lobby the government, you were talking about like it was a 3-phase approach, and the first was like, hey, let's keep the people within the organization. Let's build upon that. What did you want to see next?
Sure. The second phase is the phase that we're in right now. So while you kind of hold the demand, it's looking at where we are from a health perspective, and then determining when you start to reopen and the process of reopening. One of our co-authors of our paper, he's a deep expert from pandemics and healthcare. It's Eric Hoskins, who actually was the former Ontario Health Minister, who provides us with data on a constant basis. It's clear in my mind that the data is clear that we've hit past the peak, and I think people have forgotten what actually the words flatten the curve actually really meant. And it was very specific. It was designed not to overwhelm the Ontario and Canadian healthcare system.
Right.
Keep
as many as you can out of hospitals, right?
Correct. And it was, in fear of what happened in a number of European countries. We have so much excess capacity in hospitals. Like, again, no one ever wants to wave "we won" flag, but holy cow, no one ever thought we would have this excess capacity, number one. Number two, The real trauma here was what happened in the long-term care homes.
Absolutely devastating.
And it's a tragedy, and it's a tragedy that not only in Canada but around the world. This is where a lot of fixing needs to be done. Now, if there is a silver lining, if you take out the data relating to the long-term care homes, again, the Ontario data is unbelievably strong. The R factor, which is the virality of the disease, is below 1. This all suggests opening up the economy. But when you say that, there is an ordering on how you do it, number one. But number two, and most importantly, you got to make sure that you don't have a second wave or flare-ups. Now, the challenge that we have here is we have not done a good job on the tech front. And this is where innovation comes in terms of testing and in terms of tracing. Now, again, we don't know enough about the virus yet, but there's lots of good reasons to believe that hygiene and social distancing has achieved a vast majority of the success, well over 90% of the battle. So what the second phase we think should be is a progressive, step-by-step reopening of the economy. It's probably a 4 or 5 month process, by the way, and it never excludes the hygiene, social distancing, and the PPE, and it's that combination. But let's just, for argument's sake, that's an acceptable time frame. What it suggests is sometime in the fall, September, October, we're back to normal. What is normal?
What is
it's not the same normal pre-COVID, but it's the new normal. And this is where Chitra's book comes in. At the end of that phase is the third phase. And this is the rebuilding of the economy. And Sheetal, this is what you guys do. This is where corporate innovation comes in. There's a lot of things that we've discovered that we don't do very well. And there's a lot of vulnerabilities in our economy. This is an opportunity for both the private and public sector to reshape the economy once we're out of phase 2, so that, and unfortunately, we're going to go through a recession, I think, for about 18 to 24 months. But when we come out of that period, we're bigger, stronger, and better than we were beforehand. Because what a shame this would be with all those lives that have been lost, and if we didn't learn how to make this place or this country a better country.
I agree with you, and I think, Chitra, in your book, you talk about this. There's always opportunity in chaos, and I think we got to go and find the opportunity in this chaos. A lot of innovation happens in recessions, and for that, great companies come out of that. And I think if you want to talk a little bit about how organizations leveraging the government support should reshape themselves for what comes next, what John is referring to as phase 3.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great opportunity for us as a country and an economy to really take a pause and ask the question is, what kind of economy do we want to be? There's great lessons that we can take as, from this great pause. Just for an example, our supply chain. A lot of our products and services are, coming out of certain countries. And, do we want to, how do we want to diversify and sort of minimize our dependencies, if you will? Do we want to become more independent? We're going to have several different industries that are going to be a hit as a result. How do we support local businesses? How do we support local suppliers? How do we create a more fruitful economy that's a little bit more independent? So those are the great questions that we need to ask ourselves. So, when we start to think about planning for reopening, it comes from a problem-solving mindset. Is, if we're sort of, our North Star is asking that question around how do we diversify? What does that actually mean? And then how do we sort of work backwards and translate that into the different industries that make up our economy, essentially?
Yeah, it was. I was having an interesting conversation yesterday around automation and robotics. Like, you know, there's going to be a sense of nationalism that you're describing where, hey, let's have stuff Canadian made or have stuff that's just American made. And to lower the price of that, then robotics and like automation, and like even the manufacturing process could play a huge role in being able to do that and make yourself, you know, more dependent. And that's definitely a trend, you know, that we're going to start seeing. I think there's going to be a lot of innovative plays that are going to be coming out of this pandemic with that trend. But one of the key questions that, you know, even just as an entrepreneur, I have is what else should or could the government be doing? You know, I always felt that being an entrepreneur, there is no safety net. You're going to have to figure things out on your own. And, you know, not until this particular point did even I start to realize, hey, you know what, this government, call it a safety net, has really helped us to help us pivot and buy us the time we need to come out of this stronger. But what else do you think like the government can be supporting to do that? Because you've turned me into a believer. I'll leave that up to either one.
To either us?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I could give you, I have a variety of examples, but, you know, let me start off this way. I am an ardent capitalist. And when I say that, I'm not suggesting capitalism is perfect, but I do believe the recovery is entrepreneur-led. I also believe in, you know, the invisible hand of the government when things go bad, you know, whether you want to call it Keynesian, et cetera. But when we're in phase 3, these are the sort of things that we want to influence. Like, I'll give you one example. So who's feeling this so acutely? Alberta. Why? Not only are they getting hit by the decrease in demand from COVID, there's this ugly price war on between Saudi and Russia. And I've had a number of these debates. And again, through the same boom bust cycles. And I say to my friends and colleagues in Calgary, do you really believe that like this is a good idea to tie your economy to a commodity price where we don't control the price whatsoever? And
that's pretty controversial to say to them, but it's a reality.
It's a reality, but a number of them are realizing, and this is something that you know I had concluded back in 2014 when I was at OMERS. I made the decision to sell all of our carbon-based energy assets starting at that time because of the long-term secular decline of carbon-based energies. But it doesn't happen overnight. Now, the question really is, we can do two things as a government. We could just simply subsidize industries that we know are not going to make it on a long-term basis, or is there a way where we could leverage the short-term assets that they have, but at the same time use a lot of what we would otherwise subsidize them for, make Alberta the powerhouse of renewables in the world?
Right.
This is the same thing that really pissed me off in 2009. I had the same long debate with the federal government at the time, and it was on the automotive industry, if you remember. That was a $13 billion bailout of the automotive industry. And I went completely ballistic saying, folks, electric vehicles are going to be the future. We are in zero control of the auto industry, although it today had a good amount of jobs, but decreasing substantially.
Of course.
So what if we took that $13 billion and made the greatest EV or battery or whatever plants in the world? What happened? 4 years later, they came a knocking again for more money. And what happened? They closed up shop.
Yeah.
The automotive companies did the logical things. We didn't. Like, it was obvious. And this is the problem on the public side. How do you separate today's votes versus tomorrow's gains? And that's the fundamental issue. And this is sometimes when my capitalist hat goes, and I wish we had a little bit of central control sometimes so that we can get off of these damn 4-year cycles, because this is going to be the problem. When we subsidize industries that we know will go down,
Right.
we're going to be there again, and it doesn't create future wealth. But we've discovered right now that there's a bunch of manufacturing sensitive industries that we should have control over in this country. What a huge opportunity to say, maybe it's those industries that we should put some dollars in investment in. That's what I'm talking about. Have a little bit of foresight of where you think the puck is going to go, but don't pick the winners and the losers. Allow the entrepreneurs build the businesses and let them win or lose on their own.
Yeah, putting it into investing terms, if you were an investor, you would invest in the ETF that you think is going to be the future, not subsidize the ETF that's on its way down.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I know it's politically hard, because today's votes, unfortunately, are there. And this time, again, it's so hard when things change so damn fast, because it's hard to repivot and retrain people. And I get that. But again, if you read Chitra's book, one of the big things that she does is help guide corporations in particular that are really stuck in their own paradigm. And how do they break out without killing the golden goose? It's not easy, but I can tell you one thing for sure. The single riskiest thing that you can do is continue doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
That's the problem, right?
Agreed.
So you have to adapt and change. And COVID just showed us how fast some things happen.
It's so true. I have a question in the spirit of sort of ideation out loud. From a funding perspective, when we talk about the wage subsidies and CERB, John and Sheetal, do you think, I think that they happened in reverse order of how they should have happened? CERB came out, and then the wage subsidy came out.
Yes.
So the problem that occurred is, and I'm seeing it in small businesses right now, is because people are collecting CERB, they're not necessarily wanting to go back when things start to reopen. It should have happened in the other order.
Correct.
And now, right?
I 100% agree. Even as an entrepreneur, I mean, I was faced with the decision of, do I let people go? If I let people go, I could save my balance sheet, but they have a safety net that they could go to.
Exactly.
It's not what I did.
Right.
In the hopes that seeing a lot of your posts, John, on LinkedIn, was that, hey, there's going to be something else that's going to help us business owners.
I agree.
Help keep the tribe together.
Yeah. I agree. We fought over this.
Yes, exactly.
Big time. It was the wrong order.
It was the wrong order. I guess my question also now becomes, because entrepreneurs and because our economy is made up of small, medium businesses, it's an ecosystem, right? Part of it doesn't work without the other. I guess, what do you think that the government should be continuing to fund certain elements to get things moving again, John? How do you see this happening? Should be funding, at what point do we need to start to fuel the engine, right? To get things going.
So this is the question for phase 2.
Yeah.
So what I think, again, and I'm going to be a little general here, because I'm sure that there is things that I'm going to get wrong here, but just a general rule. The businesses now that are going back to work and now are starting to reopen, you got to turn off the benefits to them.
Yes. Yeah.
The problem that we're running into, and it's already now, and I hate to say this, but it is happening. If you are kind of indifferent economically, whether receiving the CERB payment or working, we have been seeing a number of essential workers choose to go onto the CERB. Some are legitimately afraid of catching it, no question, and shame on the companies that not protecting them. And I'm not going to go through the examples right now, but there are a number of examples.
There's a number of them. I mean, if you go up there, you'll see, these frontline workers and without protective equipment. And I think to myself, God bless your soul for coming here and working for me to even pick up my groceries, and you
I
have
agree.
no PPE.
I would nail the employers on that. That is unconscionable.
Mm-hmm.
So what I would do is you start releasing the subsidies for those businesses that are going back. But there are businesses, even in that phase 2, that due to government constraints will not be able to go at full capacity. So let's just say it's a restaurant, for example.
Sure.
And let's say that, you can't have more than, say, 50% capacity. I do believe that the government should subsidize the other 50% because it was a government imposed limitation. And that again should run until the imposition is off. And that's the way to wean off so that the businesses that have the most concerns, they'll be on it longer. But by the time phase 3 starts, unless you have workers who have serious vulnerabilities, pre-existing conditions, that may last even beyond into phase 3. But as a percentage of the total populace, like I can't imagine that being, anywhere near the numbers that we are now. But again, I think now you should start to see the reversal of this occur slowly.
I agree with that. I think, even if you're living with someone who has a pre-existing condition, let's say, your parents or whoever who may have, respiratory issues or the variety of illnesses that those people want to get back to work. And so I think I'm a firm believer that majority of people won't be abusing the system to stay on CERB.
I think that's right.
Would want to go back knowing that, hey, if I go back, I can have CERB's not going to last forever, and I definitely have to plan for my future. So if I got a job in front of me, I better go do it.
Yeah, and Sheetal, and there's really 2 types in there. If you are a vulnerable person as defined, and I'm not a healthcare expert, but let's just say as defined, there's going to be 2 types. There are going to be those who are in occupations that can actually work from home very, very effectively. And as long as the company gives them all of the right equipment, etc., wonderful. And even though they're vulnerable, wonderful. It's those that cannot do their job at home and they're vulnerable. I think that is a longer term issue that we need to deal with as a society and protect the weakest in our society. But again, I don't know what the data is, but that I just can't imagine that being a very big portion of the population.
I guess you could see that as a small subset.
I would think so.
Well, you led me to the next question I have, and the topic, Chitra, I want to speak to you about is how fast everybody went to working from home, and a bunch of bosses, i.e. even me, were like, you're not as effective if you're working from home, and shit, the whole tribe has proven me wrong. But before we get to that, this one thing I started doing in our podcast right now is to get the viewers to get to know you guys. So I'm going to ask you guys some rapid fire questions.
Okay.
It's going to be ridiculous. I don't even have them pre-written down.
Okay.
But just from knowing you guys a bit, I'm going to pry into you even so I learn a little bit more from you. So Chitra, what was the best company that you did work for, and why? Where did you learn the most?
Oh, that's a good question. I have to say TELUS. I mean, I grew up at TELUS. I started there when I was 28 and I left when I was 38. So my growth trajectory and my learning trajectory was spectacular. So every 3 years, I had a new role, I had a new boss. I was fortunate enough to work for the CEO who's now at Rogers. And I was surrounded by a group of very, very strong leaders who really led people based on their capabilities and were very focused on outcomes, which is the right mindset for me and for any organization. So they were very outcome-based thinking and really supported people's capabilities. And it was a fantastic, it's an amazing Canadian company, I have to say. You know, everything that I mean, the majority of what I learned there. Yeah.
Cool. John, I know that you love riding bikes. And when you first said to me, I was like, oh, is it like a motorcycle? You're like, no, I pedaled all the way down the panhandle of Florida. And so where's your favorite place to go and bike?
Yeah, so I'm a cyclist.
Cyclist. See, I'm still calling it. I got a Peloton.
Get the language right.
I got to get the language right. A cyclist.
Yeah, no, I'm a hardcore cyclist. So when I'm in Toronto, it's cycling quite a bit. Actually, I have had my most cycling kilometers ever this year, just because working from home is giving me lots of time to fit that in. And I also cycle up. I belong to a cycling team in Toronto with a number of folks that are in there. And, you know, the interesting thing is these folks 10 plus years ago would have been all folks that were golfing.
Right.
And they would have all been 20 to 30 pounds overweight.
Mm.
And yeah, so what's inadvertently happened is not only has it been a great healthy thing to do, and everyone on my team is relatively fit. They certainly weren't before, but it's also the business that we do together, and we call it as one acronym, kind of YPO on wheels.
I love
because
it.
we kind of have a lot of forum sessions. So way to do business. You know, what I did on occasion before, and I can't wait to do it again. I love listening to pitches on the bike.
Nice.
Have people ride with me, and it allows people to be really, really quick with your punchlines and nailing it, because and you're also, you know, breathing pretty hard, and I find it's actually a great way to get right to the point.
I'm gonna start booking TribalScale meetings, and I'm like, you got to be on a treadmill when you do it with me.
Yeah, that's
you know, I got Nahal Mehta from ENIAC Ventures joining me on a podcast, and he does this pitch and run across New York all the time.
Love that. Love that.
Very cool. All right, let's promote small businesses. What's the first dine-in restaurant both of you are going to choose to go to? Chitra, why don't you go first?
Dine-in restaurant. I think I'm going to go to Gusto 501. They just opened up on the east side in Leslieville, and I don't think they were open for long, and it's a fantastic restaurant. I will go there when we're able to.
Cool. John?
Well, I'm a bit of a fixture over at Key.
Not surprising.
Yeah, so that probably be my first one, but I got to tell you though, is that
you go there more for the company than the food.
But I got to tell you, and my kids, they love the fact that they're eating meals that they've never had. I enjoy it. The commuting or lack of commuting has enabled me to cook far more elaborate and healthy meals. And my question is going to be for restaurants is, I'm dying for the social interaction and the beer after work, etc. But I do wonder, you know, yeah, and I know this, people are getting very romantic on their Facebook feeds, etc. But I do think a lot of people are realizing maybe they should be cooking at home a little more.
A little more often, yeah.
And a lot of them have added to their culinary capabilities. If I see one more bread maker, right? I wonder, are we going to have bread makers post-COVID, or are we going to have a lot of these end up in people's garages and attics? I don't know.
I'll have you two over. I haven't been doing bread, but I've definitely been upping my grilling skills. So
let's do it.
You two over for
let's
dinner.
do it. Let's do it. Let's do it.
I'll give a shameless plug to mine, and it's also for the social aspect and the food. It's just, I love Marble. It opened up on King Street, and going over
Right.
there, it feels like Cheers when I walk in there. It's all a bunch of friends who work there, and totally missing it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very cool. Okay, let's get back. Chitra, I was going to talk to you about this really rapid conversion of working from home.
Yeah.
We're now not in groups where we're able to whiteboard ideas out with
Yeah.
each other and do these
Yeah.
small experiments in an easy way. What advice do you have for innovation to actually happen now that your workplace is in a distributed manner?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, you know, because there's there's two schools of thought, is this, the advantages of being in the office because you can have these, water cooler conversations, or see people at lunch and socialize, and you have these ideas. But the reality is, I've always believed in the power of technology and enabling people to do work from home, because I'm a critical thinker, and you're great. You need time and space and capacity to think. So as much as innovation and, talking to your colleagues happens in the office, there's also this huge opportunity now when we're at home to do some of that critical thinking. And I would actually block my own calendar. For example, at Microsoft, I used to be blocked, at meetings all day, but I didn't have the time, space, and capacity to actually think through my work and actually to produce the output. And I can only do that in silence, and I can only do that when I'm not being
It's like Bill
distracted.
Gates, he goes away
Yeah.
and it takes like 15, 20 books on a topic with him.
Exactly.
Reads, yeah.
And there's this whole concept now of, enabling and allowing people to think. And it's in the thinking when you're actually also being quite innovative. So you can take these ideas that you have in the office, but then also spend time in solitude thinking through that. And we don't allow ourselves the opportunity and the time and space to do that. So I'm a big proponent of that, particularly in the world that we live in, because we're constantly like bombarded by technology. And, I actually put my phone away and I turn off all my social feeds, and it's time to produce. And that's when your best, I find, work happens. So I think there's opportunity in learning that way. So I think it's going to be a hybrid approach. I mean, we're obviously going to get back into the office, but I think the learning here is being able to.
Do you think that's a separate question? Go fit it.
Okay.
I've learned something else.
We will get back to we have to, we're human beings, we're social beings, right? So we need to have that interaction, and organizations do need that, but it's creating that balance and, in the office for a particular reason, where you can actually consolidate and have meetings when you need to have your meetings, and then you have your time at home to actually think through or produce, or even to go for that bike ride, right? Because I'm also a big believer in, having creative thinking if you're out for a run, or you're on your bike, or you're doing a yoga class. I have some amazing ideas when I'm out for a run. So it's being able to extract what you need in the particular environments that you need, and then take the best of everything and then produce amazing stuff.
So I'd love to get your thought on the hypothesis I had, and that was, we're not going to need as much real estate in corporate real estate. After salary is probably, the second biggest line item expense.
Yeah. Yes.
So if we're able to cut down our corporate real estate, I was like, what else could you do in your space to actually want people to actually come there and ignite them with more innovation, have them actually set up a place so that you can have more innovative experiences happen, because you're going to be saving a lot more money in other areas.
Yeah.
So how could you deploy a workforce to have that? And one of the cool ideas that I just thought was like, hey, I was actually having a conversation with someone who runs a coffee company, and I was like, hey, you know what? When we come back, I always thought it was a pretty big cost to have your coffee there, but maybe now it doesn't. If I cut back on my real estate needs, it becomes really affordable for the people who come in. What are other little tips and tricks you would say that we should be doing with our workforce to have them come in and make it a collaborative approach? Because we know we don't need everybody there all the time anymore, at least in our industry, in most industries.
Right? It's about reimagining your spaces now for it to be multi-dimensional. You can think about, learning, you can think about classes, you can think about hosting workshops, you can, skills training. Skills training is going to be a huge thing that's going to be required now with the new world of work, with the time of AI, where people will have to start to acquire and learn new skills in the time of automation. So, skills training, workshops, fitness, wellness, all of those things are becoming more and more important to individuals. So when you when you take away some of the bigger costs for real estate, you can start to reimagine it in many, many different elements.
John, you were part of the team that started 111, and we got some pretty sad news last week.
Yes.
When we reimagine the workplace, what would if you were to do another version of 111, how would you set that up?
It's a bigger question. So I think that, there is still going to be a very big need and desire for community-based workplaces.
Of course.
And when you saw from the CEOs who really reacted quite strongly, did you hear any one of them that I would never ever return to that kind of environment? Not a single one.
Not a single
right?
one, yeah.
Not a single one.
It's actually pretty cool. I started having a lot of conversation with a lot of those CEOs talking about how do we all get together and maybe create our own little workplace.
Yeah. So the issue is, there's a couple of trends that I actually think were bad trends to start off with, which I think are going to be pushed back. That's hoteling trends, whereby I know a number of companies did this in order to cut real estate costs, where no one has a desk and they're, large, or an hour here, an hour there, and it constantly turns over.
Right.
Those, I believe, were culture killers because you didn't even know who was in the office, and you weren't even with your own team. And so you might as well have been at home and idea. And so you're going to see ideas like that didn't really understand the impact of human interaction go away. And thankfully so. I think those should be done. Now, there was an interesting stat I saw. I want to say it was comparing 1995 or thereabouts. The average person in an office had 260 square foot per person. Okay. Right. It's decreased to in non like community workspaces to a number that's just under 200 in 20 years. So there has been a trend there. And then if you go to WeWork, their target density was 75 square feet a person.
Yeah, they're crammed in there. It's
that is tight. And that was done in order to make the business model work. Now, in 111, the average was around 150, and there was questions on whether you could bring it down. In fact, there's also city by city density standards, right? So pushing the density equation, I think there's going to be a backlash against that. But I do think that a lot of people do also like the social interactions of being in an office environment, collaboration. I mean, the big thing is, and I love, I've always used Zoom and all of these sorts of things, but nothing replaces the serendipitous collisions of people and ideas. It just happens
absolutely
more magically. So what commercial landlords need to think about is, how do we protect the health of workers and at the same time give them a little bit more room for collaboration? Like let's not treat people like they're livestock here, right? But at the same time, think about PPE. Is there going to be a testing when you come in, entrances, ventilation, all those sorts of things that people have taken for granted? But, the number of people that I do hear saying, yeah, they like this, not needing to commute, or they enjoy doing their work in their underwear and all this sort of stuff. But that thirst and desire for human interaction, I think, is also impacting a lot of folks. So the great thing is, I think the answer is now, it's going to depend. There's going to be some folks who love it and all the power to you, and some folks that don't. So just think of it as retail. We are going to live in an omnichannel world. and it's going to be wonderful, and people will be happy based on what their preference is. Commercial real estate will not go away, but thankfully for some folks based in Toronto, your ability to actually save a few dollars and reverse some of these pretty outrageous costs are going to come back into line.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, I'm looking at our space and looking like, how can we reimagine it? And I don't envision it that the whole space, needs to be just TribalScale. I think we should make it so that these collisions do happen. I love when Tony Hsieh talks about those random collisions and how that happened. And even if you go to Bloomberg's main office in New York City, they've designed it in a way for these random collisions to happen. But how do you rethink that now to do it in a safe manner?
Right. Yeah, and it's great, and it's fun, and it's exciting, and I can tell you, right before COVID, we had leased, we were agreeing to lease certain space. We didn't pull the trigger, thank God. That exact same space is being made available to us at a remarkable financial discount. And this is only a few weeks in. So, I think the great news on this is that while the large companies, it was probably okay for them, for small and medium-sized businesses, think of restaurants. A lot of restaurants were going under before COVID because real estate prices were out of control.
Yeah, it was happening every day. You saw an awesome restaurant that was a staple for 30, 40 years shutting down.
Find a nice restaurant in San Francisco, because I would love to know. They're almost all gone. They can't afford to be there. So having these I think it makes things so rich. So there's going to be pain for sure in commercial real estate, but I can't wait for the exciting time in the phase 3 when people are rethinking their business models and rethinking how to maximize space and using people.
Yeah.
Awesome. We're coming close to our time. And so Chitra, I wanted to kick it off to you. As a recap, what's your advice to entrepreneurs? What's your advice to even, management in some of these larger organizations on how they should start rethinking themselves and get themselves prepared to come back and actually come back with a bang, as opposed to not coming back at all and sitting on the sidelines?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest observation that I've had is there's this general fear. People are in this fear can be very crippling, as you know, right? So when you're afraid and with the unknown, it can hinder you from doing different types of things. So I would say this, I would say to use this time right now as an opportunity. And I've said this many times, right? You quoted me, what I've said before is that there's always innovation lying in chaos. When there's chaos, when there's problems, there's always a roadmap or an opportunity for solutions. My husband right now is a small, medium business, totally slammed by this, but we didn't panic. We had to stop and think about what is the silver lining. There is an opportunity, and we've had to pivot, we've had to adapt. So, things are always going to happen in our world, whether it's a pandemic, whether it is, we're going to get into a recession, whether it's, changing behavior, whether it's supply chain issues, but we have to extract those challenges and turn them into opportunities. So it's really about shifting your mindset, not panicking, but looking at the opportunity within the problem. And it is the problem that is going to help you shape your outcomes.
Awesome. John, what advice you got? What do you suggest is the biggest takeaway?
I mean, the biggest takeaway is, and let's separate the human healthcare tragedy that's going on, because that's just not replaceable, and that's highly unusual. But let's talk about the economic and financial. This is the fourth recession that I've seen. and I won't go in the reasons, but we were predicting a massive global recession in the second half of 2020. Sheetal, we talked about it 2 years ago,
We sure did.
and we were bracing down for this. And it does create massive opportunity for those who focus in on things that they can control, be very, very adaptable. But this is the time that if you've been thinking of making a massive move or leap forward, it's usually made in dark times like this.
Mm-hmm.
As I say to friends, if they're looking to buy real estate and you're looking to go up market, you always go up market in a recession or downturn, because the delta, assuming that you're in the same rate of inflation of house prices, you're getting a better deal on that bigger house that you're buying.
Absolutely.
It's the same thing.
You always wish could I buy on the dip? And this
Correct.
is the dip for your career or for your business to leap from.
Correct.
Yeah.
Same thing with the stock markets, right? People buy when it's going up. No, you got to go the other way. It's the same thing on business. While it looks dark and dreary, we will be on the other side. We will be through this by the fall. And then by the fall, we will be in a recession, no question, for 18 to 24 months. And that's the time when you should really be thinking about how you're going to beat your competitors at that time, because a lot of them are going to be frozen. They're going to be afraid. And this is the time markets do move because of fear and greed.
Yeah,
absolutely. Very well put. Very well put. Again, I want to thank both of you for joining me on today's podcast. Very, very informative. And I know a lot of people are going to learn a lot from everything you guys have done. I'm going to say this. Dr. Anand, congrats again.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
No easy feat. That is amazing. I'm lucky enough to call you a friend and somebody I could call
Absolutely.
on for advice.
100%.
John, thank you so much. You always come with the straight goods, man. I can't wait for our Raptors to defend the championship and then have dinner with you in the Platinum Lounge.
Yes, we'll do that for sure.
Thank you to you both for joining us today. I'll sign off by saying our podcast is available on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn. It's called First Name Basis. We always try to have a real conversation here. You guys definitely brought it today, so thanks. Appreciate it.
Thank
Great.
you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
guys.